everybody. Welcome to Vida Tennis, the podcast for those of us who eat, sleep, breathe tennis. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Tim Bainton, president of Blue Chip Sports Management. Tim is a professor at Marymount University's College of Business, Innovation, Leadership, and Technology. He's also a professor at Washington University of Science and Technology. He played tennis at George Mason University, and he's currently serving as the head coach at Marymount University. Welcome, Tim, to Vida Tennis.
I appreciate that. It's great to be here.
You know, people might know you because you've been in the industry for quite some time.
It's funny, I'm 40 years of age now, and I used to be known as, I think, the young, brash guy in the industry, and yet now I think I'm pretty, there's gray in here, and I think, I don't know if that's the case anymore, so.
It's all that brashness. It turns into white hairs.
yeah, that's true. The tennis industry will definitely make you go gray. That is very, very true.
All right, Tim. So let's start with your story. Just kind of walk us through how you got started into coaching, which is, you were just telling me offline, it's like at the true heart of who you are and what you do, and how you started in coaching and what you're doing now on the sports management side.
Absolutely. So I grew up about 20 miles southeast of London in a place called Weybridge in Surrey. And long story short, I have a sister who's 18 months younger than me. My mum, who'd worked, she was a school teacher, and she had taken time off to have myself and my sister. And the time came where one summer she was like, you know what, I need to get back in shape. And she went to a local health club that at the time was called the Chris Lane Tennis and Health Club, and now is owned by the David Lloyd Group. And went in one morning and tried to put myself and my sister in the creche, as we call it in England, or the nursery or the daycare, and go work out. And I fought tooth and nail. I was not having that. And she asked the lady at the front desk, do you have anything else going on? And there was a tennis camp. And I joined the tennis camp. And one morning turned to one day, to 1 week, to 6 weeks of the summer. And the rest was history. There's no family lineage. I did grow up quite close to Wimbledon, which was nice, but it's not related in any shape or form. I will say this, a couple of shout outs. There were the importance of having a great coach when you first start. I think this lady probably hates me telling this story because it shows that she's older than me. But Claire Pollard, who is obviously an NCAA legend at Northwestern, the head coach, the women's head coach there, she was actually the coach that ran that summer camp that morning when I first tried tennis. She obviously is originally from England, had won an NCAA doubles title and come back sort of looking to get into coaching, and the stars were aligned, if you will. And she was instrumental in me really falling in love with tennis and enjoying it. And as a female coach too, and someone that's gone on and done so many amazing things, it's funny what a small world it still is. And I'll just quickly tap on that, because then as I got into tennis and it became my life, I was then fortunate enough to be coached by a gentleman called Justin Sherring. Justin actually is the coach of Joe Salisbury, who obviously just won, I think it was the second World Tour Championships, and has won 3 straight US Opens with Rajiv Ram, formerly coached Jonah Conter. So there's a big part of why I stayed in tennis, and it was an awful lot of luck, right place, right time. But those two people in particular were instrumental in me really falling in love and staying with the game of tennis. So give them a shout out. To this day, would not be here if it wasn't for those very positive experiences. Then I was top ranked junior and traveled around Europe and played, and ended up playing college tennis on a scholarship here in the US. Not so fun fact, I was a freshman. I landed in the US on September 8th, 2001, 3 days before 9/11 happened. And I went to college at George Mason, which, for those that don't know, Division I, Fairfax, Virginia, so about 25 miles outside of Washington, D.C. I actually credit that very sad day with actually why I stayed, because my intention was to, what a lot of us Brits do, is we come to the US on a scholarship for 1 year, and we enjoy playing a little bit of tennis as we wind our careers down, and we meet some very pretty American girls, and then we go home and take a college placement back home. I actually credit that event with actually me staying in the United States, because I think it really brought the community very close together, and especially coming from so far away, it was quite eye-opening in how a stranger, new territory. I'd never even visited Washington, D.C. I hadn't done visits. This was different times. So that, I think, led to me staying here. When I graduated, I briefly worked in investment banking, and then my goal was to own a tennis club. I missed tennis. I thought that was passed me, did all the things you should do or supposed to do, got certified by the PTR, the USPTA, went to every conference. Got a fun story about how the first conference I attended, I slept in my car because I couldn't afford a hotel. My goal was to buy a club. Then again, two pieces of advice sort of out of context in life is that you need a lot of luck and you need to work really, really hard. And basically got an opportunity with a company called the Van Meter Companies. They're a multi-billion-dollar land developer corporation. And they owned a rinky-dink 5 indoor tennis club. And they basically gave me kind of a golden handshake. I was 25 at the time. They were like, you can be the director, you can run the club, we'll give you some ownership, and we just need this club to operate. There's a whole backstory as to how they acquired it, which I won't bore you with. And I was like, okay, so I went in, turned this club around just purely through hard work. I didn't know anything. I was 25 years of age. I didn't know how the industry worked, but I worked my butt off. And basically, they were like, oh, you're actually doing a good job. You put this club in the black and reputation's growing and it's part of our portfolio. They own golf courses and a few other things. And they were like, what do you want to do next? And I had this crazy idea where I was like, well, why don't we replicate this model? And that's where my company, Blue Chip Sports Management, was born. It was a subsidiary of the Van Meter Companies until 2019. And that was very beneficial in that space because as it grew and we were able to go into other spaces outside of the tennis and health club, especially the indoor tennis and health club realm, it was basically a small business that was supported by a billion-dollar corporation. But people often think that, oh, how lucky you must have been to have this support. Let me be very clear. It was ingrained in me from as a 25-year-old, though, that this is something that if you don't turn a profit month after month, it goes away. So it sharpened me to the reality of running health clubs at a very young age, because I knew that I had support, but it was incumbent upon success. There was no, we take a month off. There was, and that came with a lot of sacrifice. I mean, I worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for a good portion of my late 20s, early 30s. And we created Blue Chip Sports Management that operated as a subsidiary of the Van Meter Companies. And then I bought their share out in 2019. And that's kind of then allowed me to sort of go in and do some other things. And along that road, I coached at the highest levels. I mean, shout outs here, two of my guys who I taught from inception, Ryan Colby, currently playing at the University of Georgia, Cole Hensroth, who's just signed with the Gamecocks at the University of South Carolina, just to name a few. I mean, my core, I am a tennis coach. I've been there. I've coached high school. I've coached USTA zonal teams. I've done the whole USTA high performance thing. I've coached at Eddie Hurt, Orange Bowl, Junior US Open. You name it, I've been there. So that's my identity. I mean, I am a coach. And I think sometimes, and it's important to share that story, because at this point in my life, now very much as an executive in the sports management arena, that can sometimes get lost. But that's where my heart and my passion is, and it always will be. So all that sort of in the past, I don't know, what is that, 17 years, 18 years?
Yeah. What other sports are you working with currently? You've led into other sports, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our business was in the racket club space. That's very different to sort of the high-end country club space. Now we do, for example, currently have contracts with Invited, formerly Club Corp, where we run the racket portion of their business here in the Mid-Atlantic. So, and I've managed country clubs through the years, all portions of it, food and beverage, golf, the lot. So that diversifies sort of what we do. But the tennis piece for us is your typical indoor racket club. So it's typically more affordable, typically has a gym, a nursery, maybe a small spa. Back in the day, used to have racquetball courts, and they've probably been turned into something else. Really were built when the tennis boomed, sort of 80s, specifically, land was cheaper and all of this. The diversification of that for our company has got into, we are golf simulators, number one. It's probably the clearest thing that we've ventured into, and that's something we're going to continue to do. We found that to be successful. We also have got into, I mean, we embrace, my first paddle activation will happen in February of next year. Pickleball, obviously, at all of our sites that we manage. We offer it. I have some opinions on infrastructure in pickleball. I like it because, look, at the end of the day, I'm a businessman. If people want to come, pay, play, and stay, I'm not going to turn you away, right? And I think one of the things that our company has done well, one of the things I'm proud of myself, is being versatile, really paying attention to what the trends are. I mean, at my core, I am a tennis purist, but I also like putting food on my table. So it's understanding when things need to change and being ahead of those curves. So we listen to the consumer and do those things. Yeah. So we also, in our area, one of the big sort of low-hanging fruits, if you will, was corporate wellness. There's a lot of big business that will pay you to come in and run corporate wellness programming because they want to be the Washington Business Journal healthiest employer and all of these awards, and that's big business. And we were ahead of the curve again with that. And a lot of that is credit to actually our parent company back in the day, Van Meters. They piloted a lot of that stuff. We ran with it. We offer basketball, volleyball, anything that we can interpret that. It's pure real estate. It's like running a McDonald's. If I don't have people coming in constantly trying to pay, play, and stay, then something's wrong. So in a perfect world, would it just be a tennis mecca, tennis 24/7, and that would be it? But the reality is, yeah, of course, there's no one that would advocate for that more than me. But the reality is very different. Unless you are a congressional country club of the world with heavy dues that the tennis and the racket department takes a loss every year, then it's just not reality for most of the rest of the industry. So what I like about it is we get creative. So I look at it as purely real estate. I mean, if people ask me nowadays, what do you do? I said, I manage real estate. That's really that simple. And trying to figure out ways that we can branch off and do different things.
Sure. What are some of those main differences that you see when you consult with different types of tennis facilities or even perhaps to other sports facilities? Even though you mentioned you're more in the racket sports world, but even comparing that country club space to a public place or an indoor facility, a fitness center, something like
Sure.
that. What are some of the main differences when you're consulting with these different types of facilities?
Absolutely. So look, I like to say we've seen it all. A big part of our business in the early days was sort of failing generationally owned indoor racket clubs that had been built, like I said, late 70s, early 80s. No one has spent a dime on them for 40 years. They're now falling apart. The owner, the mother, father that owned it are now aged out. And there's usually a son that is, and I will be sexist on that because it usually is a guy, unfortunately, that has run the business into the ground because it has basically been mummy and daddy have paid for this person for a number of years. And here we are in today's climate. So they don't want to sell usually because it's a fixture in the community. And I think that they were built for the right reasons, but they need a lot of help. So when you go and you work with a club like that, and the reason why I know something about this is that club I mentioned that started my relationship with the Van Meter companies was exactly this that I'm talking about. The difference was that the Van Meter companies could afford to take a loss. These other clubs can't. So what happened was we would go in and we would turn these clubs around. And that's a tough operation because you are talking about changing a culture without changing the identity. Now that's a challenge right there. So everything from systems, operations, systems. Is there usually a director of tennis, a head pro there that's just basically just got lazy and is taking a paycheck that doesn't really care? Absolutely. Everything from front desks to general managers to how they do bookkeeping, front office, back office, systems, the whole 9 yards. So that's a complete overhaul and it takes time. And then also the challenge for us is we try and set it up where we go in where we're going to turn this club around. But if the club doesn't make any money, it doesn't have any money to pay us. So our contracts are always back-ended. So we come in, we get you in the black, and then we start to take a percentage. But we run the whole show for the most part. It's not always the case. One thing I'll quickly just throw in there that Blue Chip does well, you will never see us in a club and know that it's Blue Chip there. If we're in a management position, we do not want you to know about it. It's a very selfless move that we make.
Mm.
We don't ever have our pros wearing branded stuff. They wear the brands of the club that they are there working for. But we're the ones pulling the strings, if that makes sense. Then you go, for example, I mentioned the clubs that we work with Invited. It's a whole different beast. You're just a racket provider. I say just. We have a revenue split. They pay us a management fee because we have to have a director there on site that takes care of stuff. And we do have budget monthly goals that need to be hit, but it's a whole different beast because it's supported by heavy golf and social dues. The racket club can't keep the lights on if you do not hit and make payroll unless you are hitting your monthly goals. So a different environment. We do a lot of management of swim and tennis clubs in our area. I mean, a significant amount, and those vary based on the demographics of the area, the HOAs in the area. Some are done because we have an indoor base nearby and we want to make sure that we can control when people go outside, if you will. Some are more lucrative. Some of the deals are slightly different. The percentage split's slightly different. But obviously, if they're a homeowners association, they typically have a non-profit status. So they are not looking to make money. They're looking just basically to net out their expenditures. So yeah, I mean, when I've traveled and gone and seen, I mean, I've audited over 100 clubs easily across the United States. And one thing that I have noticed is that trend of the generational pass down and then not having the tools to replicate it and not move with the times, unfortunately, is extremely common. There's a family who I've worked with, the son, Clark Burkle, is actually a former Olympian swimmer, not a tennis player. But his father and him, they just sold their clubs in the Louisville area to Genesis. And I've worked with them through the years. And that's an example of a typical racket club that was, I mean, it is mom and pop owned. I mean, his father and his business partner owned it. And they had 2 facilities there. But it was an extremely well-run operation. And I'll tell you how I got involved was because they also had ownership that wasn't afraid to ask questions and to look outside the tennis industry for solutions. At their core, they love tennis. Clark's mother was a tennis player, an NCAA tennis player. And they built these clubs and they were part of them. Like I said, 80s, land was cheaper, tennis was booming and all of this. But they ran facilities that really moved with the times as well, but also were able to keep tennis specifically and also at an affordable price point, because that's important too. If you're living in a state where I'm in Florida right now, so it's a little different, but for most of the country, that affordable indoor piece has been completely demolished in the past 20 years. And again, to sidebar here a little bit, that's a massive problem. When you see all these metrics that tennis is growing and stuff, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It's not true. It was in a really bad space prior to COVID, and then COVID created, because there are some facts about it. You can play from 3 to 103. It's the only sport globally that has gender equity in pay and also participation. It's been scientifically proven to add 10 years to your life and all of this stuff that we all know. The problem is that infrastructure-wise, you can't have a sport that is not accessible 12 months of the year to at least the middle class. I mean, that's the problem. We talk about a sport that typically has been told it's for the elite, right? Tennis, golf, those 2 sports go hand in hand in that. You have a sport that now has been priced out from even the middle class for an affordable racket club indoor model, which means less people will play. And that's true. And that's a real estate issue that will not be changed. The size of a tennis court, the size of an indoor tennis club at an affordable rate will not change. In any metropolis city that you are in, unfortunately, there is no coming back from that. And the issue is that we had this in place, and the last 20 years, through poor governance, poor decisions, it's been absolutely obliterated. Because if you look at the size of it, now again, there are outliers. I live in the DC area. You've got Chevy Chase, Bethesda, Congressional Country Club, beautiful indoor places, but they're not accessible. And that,
they're not for everybody.
and that's a problem, right? And we do work with places like this. It's not that they haven't done anything wrong. Let me be clear on that. It's not their fault.
Right.
But the problem is it will start to be felt, because it's generational. So when you have people not actively playing as much, but the USTA will throw some guidelines up, that some data at you that is completely, I don't know, completely made up. But tennis got a bump. It got a lifeline through COVID. There's no other way to say it. And I can throw metrics at you from our own business. We were heavily getting out of the racket club space because of this. From a business standpoint, it's been reevaluated, but I think it's a sad reality that a pandemic is what potentially has given our sport that we all love and care so much about a lifeline.
Would you say though that most clubs are not profitable though? They're just trying to maybe break even, perhaps? Is that what you've seen? Because that's what I've always heard, at least for indoor facilities.
Yeah, very often, absolutely. If I was to advise somebody that wanted to own their indoor a club, I'll tell you right now, if I could do all of this again, and my sole goal was to, what it was back when I was 22, was to just own one club. I would go to North Carolina. I would buy a 6 to 8 court clay facility where I could also live in the clubhouse, right? And I know guys that do this, and they're the happiest tennis pros around because they own their shop. They make enough to put food on their table, and they run a really great community, right? People come, but are they driving Ferraris? No. Right. But that's the trade-off, right? But are they running a successful club that is beloved in the community, that they're putting money back into the upkeep of clay courts or adding maybe some upgrades and so on and so forth? Yes, of course. And those clubs are still out there. You can go to some places in North Carolina. You can buy a club for, I mean, when was I last doing some stuff? I mean, before someone called me out on misquoting this, I was last there I was in Greenville, North Carolina in 2021. And I looked at 2 clubs that were for sale for around the 600,000 mark. So it's very doable, but how do you buy that club and make money? Well, it's very simple. You need to have somebody that is all in, and I've talked about this in my business. We haven't pulled the trigger with it, but the idea of buying a facility, say in North Carolina, and having a young, hungry pro and here's the key to how this is successful, that you give equity to, right? So that person's not leaving, right? But again, a lot of things have to go your way. That right person, right time, right purchase price, all of these things, right location, the right guy or girl to come in and that will literally live rent-free upstairs in the clubhouse, will work all of the angles, like sweeping the clay, dealing with some of the maintenance, also coaching 30, 40 hours a week on the court and killing it, being the face of the franchise. Can that then become a profitable investment? Yes, it can be. Are there easier ways to make money? Absolutely. So, but is it a fun process? Yeah, sure. I'll say this about my company real quick. I don't know that anyone really knows this. When I was able to get 100% ownership of Blue Chip in 2019, the first thing I did was I gave 30% of the company away to guys, and we're very proud of this. The average tenure of a tennis pro at Blue Chip is 8.5 years. That's unheard of in our industry. And it's not because we pay the most, and I'll talk about pay structure, but there's a chance for equity. And there's a chance that we don't do things the way that everyone else does. You're allowed to be creative. You're allowed to have ownership of what you do. You're allowed to add avenues and branches that can help you in your career. So yeah, I retain 70%, and 30% is given away currently to 6 people who have been with the company for an average of about 8 to 12 years each. Now, what does that do? Well, I think I was in a position to reward these people, something that I didn't set out to do this, but I learned enough from this industry that if you have good people, you want to keep them. And this is a way to keep them. And it's a way to also, when times are good, they're rewarded, but also when times are hard, that they also feel the pain and the sacrifice. And it's just the honest truth. But there's a lot that can be said for having your name on that company. And I've learned later in life, I wish I knew this when I was in my 20s, but I am a firm advocate for empowering people that are a lot better and know an awful lot more than I do. I just want to be along for the ride, if I'm being honest. So what I like about my decision when I gave 30% of the company away was And I'll still get more of it. I have a personal plan with my main business partner at Blue Chip that eventually my personal equity will completely dilute and be given away to key people that are growing the company. So, as I hopefully retire gracefully.
And now you've seen the business side, you've been on the court, you have a different perspective, I guess, from the regular pro, the regular director, even. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on compensation, the pay structure that is
Sure.
currently used in our industry. Does it make sense to you? Are there anything that you think we definitely need to change or anything like that?
Unfortunately, and this is where the tennis industry as a whole has gone wrong, is that there is not one solution for, there are so many different ways and operations and type of operations. You can be working at a HOA, you can be working at a school, you can be working for an organization, an association, a country club, a low-end country club, a high-end country club. You can own a management, all of these different ways in which you can be compensated. And they are all very different because at the end of the day, the company has to have the money in order to compensate you. It has to be a profitable venture, otherwise it goes away. That's just common sense. One of the issues is, and why we lose a lot of good people in our industry, is because there's a lot of copying. But the problem is, if I work at a country club and then I move to a racket club and I expect the same compensation, which as a human being makes sense, but without understanding what's behind it, then you often lose people. And this is very common. And you also see a lot of good pros that have a real impact on people's lives that move to a cushier position, typically at a high-end country club, because of the benefits, because of the pay. And please hear me on this. I don't blame them in the slightest, right? But the problem is that it becomes that their impact on growing the game becomes less as a result. There aren't ways around that. It's truly a numbers game. If I own a company and I bring in X, I can only afford to pay you Y. It doesn't matter how many times you want to challenge me on that.
Of course.
Now, are there bad owners that run people and don't treat them fairly? Absolutely. I can tell you this at Blue Chip. One of the proudest things, there's a lot more money I could make that I don't, because I want the peace of mind of knowing that our employees are doing a great job and won't go anywhere, right? Now, again, if I was in my late 20s and I had that same autonomy, I probably would, I'll be honest, I'm guarded by my own reflection. I would probably not have the same attitude. That's life, that's wisdom, that's growing up, that's listening, learning, but that's the truth. So we do things very differently. I look outside the tennis bubble, right? If you look at Fortune 500 companies and you look at successful entities that have high levels of retention, there are a couple of very obvious things that keep people wanting to work hard and stay engaged. Firstly, I don't care what anyone says, it's to do with compensation. Now, compensation in our industry breeds a nature of a hunter, right? Where's the next bounce to go get paid X? Doing stuff under the table, doing stuff where you cheat on your taxes, all of these things. Now, the problem with that, if I'm the individual, please hear me on this, I don't blame you for doing it. I would do the same thing. But if you're looking at the whole picture, it's very damaging. And the problem is that our situation is unique. When we had our parent company, I was not able to pay the most because it was a successful business. The business needed to make money. It was not a charity. Mm-hmm. But I was able to offer our staff incentive trips, paid vacation, benefits, top-class benefits, 401k, all of these things, which for a typical tennis pro is inconsistent. So that obviously helped. And again, remember what I said at the very start, there's two keys to success in this world: work your ass off and luck, right? So, but I was able to learn from this. So when I absorbed ownership of Blue Chip completely, we talk about how I could take more money out. This is a big reason why I don't. I had to set up the same or close to infrastructure because I knew that that's what was going to keep people around. So, and that costs money. So the typical tennis pro, the typical tennis club is you're an assistant pro, you hope to be a head pro. The head pro typically wants the director's job, finally becomes a director because the director has been fired, and then they become the director. And the director finally now gets a salary and sits back and does F all for the rest of their life, doesn't want anyone challenging them. And again, hear me clearly, I don't blame them because their trajectory to be there has been based on not a great experience, right? So they're hardwired to now, anyone with a great idea, anyone that's like a young, hungry pro that clearly is the face of this club, oh, they're to be demolished. We don't like that person, right? Because I'm they threaten me. And that is so dangerous. Mm-hmm. So what we do, like I said, you have a salary. There's no commissions, there's no lesson splits, there's annual bonuses. It's a corporate structure. You get hired, you get paid X. You get this paid time off. These are your hours, and that's it. Now, people will challenge me on this. Well, what if the pro is not on the court? Well, we are fortunate that we are well organized enough that that person is busy for 40 hours a week, which they are paid for. Annually, they will have a review. They will have, well, actually, we have quarterly reviews, but annually they will have a review based on performance and based on, and they're challenged to find new, the pros that work with us in that particular space, their new avenues of business, with which they can then be compensated for, referral fees, whether it comes under their umbrella. So we're constantly looking to add more to the portfolio of everyone that works for us. Does that make sense? Or with us?
Are you talking about directors, or are you talking about pros as well being paid on a salary base?
I don't use any of those terminologies. No head pro, no director, nothing. You work for Blue Chip.
Okay. Got it.
That's simple.
Who's your leader? Who's running the show?
Our chief operating officer is a gentleman called Jason Warnock, who is the best operator of clubs in the world, period.
No, I mean like at the individual club.
So at a site, okay, obviously there is somebody that is in charge, but that is tasked by their name versus a title, if that makes sense. So, for example, if you go to, I'll leave the names out, but if you go to, say, one of the country clubs that we manage, right, there is a gentleman, Dan, in this case, who he is in charge, right? But it's not ego-driven that he's the director. He's in charge. People know that because it's Dan. Dan's in charge. Dan's the face of this club, right? Who else is in his team? It's so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, right? There's parity, because one of the most damaging things that we do in our industry is we pigeonhole these people into, one of the things I'll never do, why ever call someone an assistant tennis professional? How does that help your business grow? Would you want to take a lesson from someone that says assistant? Would you have a heart surgery from an assistant surgeon? It's absolutely ridiculous. There's truth, it's what's in a title, and these aren't things I've come up with. This is go study the successful Fortune 500 companies. None of them are using these typical titles anymore. So of course there's internal infrastructure. So let me be clear on that. Of course there is, but externally you're part of Team Blue Chip. And that is something where also new people come in that are obviously paid less, that are starting their careers. They feel part of the family. We strive to have a culture of it being a team, and that's very important to our success. And one of the things that I think is very much overlooked, not just in our industry, I think in most industries, is the power and the influence of a younger generation actually being mentored, but most importantly, listened to, because we are moving at warp speed in everything we do in our lives. And if you're a tennis professional and you go and you get your first job, say you come from one of the PTM programs and you've gone and got your first job at Congressional, I'm sorry for everyone at Congressional picking on these guys today, you're the assistant pro. Let me be clear, you have no chance of being the director of tennis there, period. I'm just going to tell you that, right? That's a problem. Because what it does is it isolates people to a position where they become frustrated, bored, because human nature is to want something that grows, right? Now, the easiest way to do that is through compensation, but that obviously is not also the case, because you can be one of the least motivated people in the world. And there are some out there, but to be an assistant tennis professional for 40 years, and that's your whole career, you're very much in the minority. And again, nothing wrong with it. Please, we need these people. But it is not incumbent to wanting to be successful and to grow. And that's where, again, I haven't worked for Google or for Facebook or companies like this, but just pay attention. Pay attention. The industry just needs to step outside of its own bubble and pay attention to the rest of the world, which has just completely moved around and superseded everything going directly on in the tennis space. I think the bigger racket space is disrupting that for the good, but where does that all settle? Time will tell.
Yeah. And as far as, say, administrative skills go, what is it that you feel that maybe tennis directors, whatever you want to call them, right, might be missing, in particular in our industry, compared to other types of sports facilities that you managed?
Let's look at this. Firstly, two things are important to understand. Management and leadership start with yourself, period, right? I teach university courses on these things. It starts with the individual.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a young 22-year-old, do you know that? I didn't know those things, right? So valuing mentorship and being in the right place, absolutely. But it's general education and not your typical education of going to a class. It's just education. And that's a hard thing to mandate, right? It will never be mandated. What happens is we also, as tennis pros, we take ourselves way too seriously, right? The reality is that it's not that hard to teach tennis, okay? If you're athletic, if I can teach you to feed, the keys are the soft skills, right? Your ability to sell yourself, your ability to create relationships, your ability to work with others, to be engaging, to be a chameleon. I wrote an article on this, a chameleon, being able to talk different tones of voice, knowing your audience. All of these things are incumbent to be a really successful tennis professional. It's not to do with where you played or how good you were. It's got nothing to do with that. A very small percentage, admittedly, before I get corrected on this, a very small percentage of outliers exist in that space where, yes, I will grant you that your success, your name will supersede any of your inability to have personality, character, or even be a good tennis pro. Absolutely. If you want a grand slam, I get it, okay? But that is a very, very, very minute population.
Right.
The other part of it is beyond that. And this is something that we did at Blue Chip was you have got to educate people to be their own brand, right? So what I mean by that is, I'll use my company as an example. Blue Chip Sports Management is the Coca-Cola, if you will. Anyone that works for Blue Chip is encouraged to be the Fanta, the Sprite, the Dr. Pepper. They all are under our umbrella, but it is our job to make sure that they flourish and create their own brand and identity. That is so frowned upon in our industry, so frowned upon. Any sort of original entrepreneurial thought is shut down. I'm the director, I'm in charge, do what I say. Okay? Now, let's be clear. If you're some jumped up young pro with an ego and can't keep your stuff together, then yes, of course, that's not the right fit. But we've got ourselves in this really bad situation where it's director is God, everyone else fall in line, right? How about director's just been around and it's the director's job not to be the face of the franchise. It's the director's job to look really damn good because everyone around them is creating their own Sprite, their own Fanta. And if they end up leaving, good. It means you did your job. And it means that someone else is going to come in and flourish even bigger and greater than they did. But we don't work in that world, in that space. One of the main reasons why our industry suffers is we try and keep up with the Joneses. If a club down the street is doing something, God forbid we had our own thought, we're going to copy it. It's reactive mentality, right? Yeah. And then if anyone asks me about the other club down the street, I'm going to talk so much trash because that's ingrained in us, right? Yeah. One of the things I'm most proud of, I promise you, If I see a coach that's a friend of mine, even a coach that I don't know, has done something successful, I'll like it on social media, I'll share it, I'll give them a shout out. It's growing our sport. When did we become so egotistical, so insecure that we can't celebrate the successes of others? Because the bigger picture is that is what is going to make us great.
Yes.
It is so obvious,
Mm-hmm.
but yet it is seldom done, right? I live in an area where JTCC is, Junior Tennis Champion Center. I'll give you an example of how I'm proud of how relationships in my personal situation have worked. I mentioned two kids earlier that are playing very high level D1 that I taught from inception, and I was their primary coach till about 14, 15. Most coaches won't hand those kids off, right? It'll become, oh, they left, they got stolen, they got poached. I handed these kids off because there wasn't anything else I could do for them.
Yeah.
And that takes a big man or woman to take that responsibility. Mm-hmm. Now, it wasn't just what I could offer them on the court. I didn't have enough density of the level of the playing partners. I also, on a selfish note, I couldn't travel with them. The money didn't even work anymore. They had to move. But I was the one proactively doing it versus the relationship becoming negative and then them leaving and then me talking trash. Mm-hmm. You won't find that at Blue Chip. We don't do that. The idea that we own our customer, we own them. I mean, do people listen to themselves? It's absolute insanity. If someone goes and takes a lesson somewhere else, it's because you weren't good enough. Just take a look in the mirror. It's that simple. Yeah. Your lesson was not as good. And people say, oh, well, they're cheaper and this and that. Okay, again, hear me clearly. That will happen maybe the first time. I get that. You're at a private club and it's X amount to take a lesson and someone's teaching at a public court down the street and it's X. They can't be that bad. But common sense would be that if you owned a club, you would probably try and find a way to bring that person into your infrastructure. If you were the general manager, the director, the owner, that doesn't happen. We ostracize these people. You know, I often walk around, like in Arlington, Virginia. It's a very affluent area, but in the public parks there, the tennis and pickleball is booming. On a nice day, the courts are packed. Yeah. And there is multiple people out there teaching private lessons as a side gig. It's become almost, teaching tennis has become like driving an Uber. And I walk around and I observe, but I pay attention. And you better believe if I see someone good at them, I make a point of doing this. I walk over, I introduce myself, I give them my card, I compliment them. I'm like, look, hey, I would hope that I'm someone that is in the tennis world. It's nice to get a compliment from. I'm like, I don't ostracize them. They're making an income. They have a client that wanted to come and pay them. But yet the person at the club sitting within the four walls of their facility is mad because they don't have someone on their court, but someone else does. It's absolute mad. You're only as good as your little black book, as your consumer list, your client list. And it's really that simple. But it's been very damaging. And I've seen a lot of clubs with nice, warm indoor courts sit empty through the years because all they do is play the blame game. You go in, oh, what's the issue? Well, so-and-so left and he took all of our business. Come on, there has to be some accountability. Accountability is poor in our industry in general.
Yeah, no, thank you for being so candid with the points that you made there. No, that totally makes sense. And then I also wanted to ask you about, what are your thoughts on what the associations are doing now for pros? Do you have any thoughts on maybe how that can be improved, at least here in the US? That's a very big question. You can take it in a direction.
When I was young, for lack of a better word to say, I didn't have a pot to piss in. I was teaching 40 hours a week for not much money at all and didn't have any benefits and just trying to start in this career. I saw the importance of these associations, PTR and USPTA in particular, and I got certified. I've had a long certified tenure with these, but I will be honest with you, I currently am not a paying dues member of either organization. My last USPTA dues lapsed a year ago, and my PTR dues just lapsed. But for the most part of the past 18 years, I have been a member of both organizations. there's two hats I have to wear to answer this question because mine changed. When I was trying to be a typical tennis professional, I saw the most value in the USPTA high performance program. Those were truly the best coaches, and I learned more from candid conversations at Davis Cup events or US Open and so on and so forth than I could ever learn from someone from PTR teaching me a weekends clinic. Now, that's not going to be commonplace for everyone, and I understand that. That's my own personal experience. Do I put any value or stock in going to get certified by either of these organizations? Absolutely not. It's at this current juncture. And I urge anyone out there, listen, the organizations, it's very simple. You have to get value from them. If you are getting value from them, then great, pay more. I get it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that do any of us actually audit the value? That's all I'm asking. So look,
yeah,
I'm very fortunate. For me, it's not a financial issue to pay. I choose to currently not be paying their dues. It's almost like
what I always hear is people just pay, and this is just from conversations I've had with pros, offline. And I've thought about it even at times myself as a pro. What I always hear is the only reason why I pay for annual due is for the insurance, the on-court liability insurance. That's it.
Do you know anyone that's actually ever used it? It's like the Loch Ness monster. It's mythological.
It's fear.
Right? Exactly. So here's the thing, right? I'm so happy you brought that up because that's just look. Firstly, there's two major dynamics between the two organizations that people have to understand. The USPTA is a non-for-profit association. The PTR is a for-profit business. Those are two distinctions that, again, nothing against any of them, but those are distinctions that are not clearly understood. Both of them are reliant heavily on dues. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. The problem is that they have been pitted against each other, right? Poor leadership, egos, reactive behavior. It's commonplace that if one has a new initiative, I guarantee you it won't last more than a year. If you don't believe me, go back and look. And if one has one initiative, within the next week, the other one has the same initiative, just with a different name. This is a major problem because the rest of the world that are competing for this and for people's eyes and attention do not operate with that mindset. These are not thought-provoking, forward-thinking operations, but yet they got given the keys to the kingdom. And that's been detrimental. Now, the USPTA have just announced they have a new CEO. And I want to make it very clear, I will re-sign my dues. And for whatever influence I have, I will be 100% an advocate for that new CEO. The reason is because at my core, I'm a tennis pro, and it hurts me personally when these organizations do not succeed. Mm-hmm. So my attitude is this. USPTA have dug itself a hole that I'm optimistic the new CEO will be able to dig us out of. It takes people who are disenchanted and hopefully maybe have some level of platform to say what I just said. I'm not going to come in here and bash this. I need this company. I need this organization to work.
Yeah.
We all need it to flourish. Mm-hmm. We need it to be so good that our dues are $1,000 a year because that's how much we need it. Yeah. That's not been the case. Again, it comes with accountability. I was very lucky. There's the Directors Club of America, right? And I did a presentation for them. I haven't done much presenting in the tennis industry for 2-3 years. Used to do it. It used to be like my weekly occurrence. I closely followed their growth. And I'm not in any stretch of the imagination saying it's perfect. I like the fact that there's new voices, and I like the fact that there's some younger leadership and people being listened to. And I like that they're disrupting the USPTA and PTR. And I was invited to come do a webinar. There was a handful of people that called the Directors Club of America and said, you shouldn't have Tim on because he basically goes against the grain. Well, hopefully, Jen, everything I tell you is articulate, it's educated, it's well thought out, and I've lived it. It's not to call people out or to be demonstrative, but it's to hold people accountable. And no one has to be more accountable than myself. I own a business, right? So there's a point where you've earned the right. And I've been around this. Any speaker, any board member, I know all of these people. And I've seen the good and the bad, like the good and bad of myself, right? So I'm in a position where I can speak very honestly about sort of how these operate. The presentation that I did for the Directors Club, I had a dozen LinkedIn messages saying, thank you for saying that. It needed to be said. I didn't say anything bad. I didn't call anyone out. I just had a nice, honest conversation. I didn't even think too much about it. But my point is that there were people, higher up people, who took the time when it was announced that I was going to speak to email the Directors Club and say, oh, don't have Tim on. He's going to rub. It's ludicrous, right? So we have organizations that, and this is the long-winded way of getting to my point. Mm-hmm. The USPTA and the PTR historically do not allow people to have a difference of opinion that is respected and heard. They also operate exclusively reactively, and they're competing against each other, whether you like it or not, whether they admit it or not, for the same dues. The same dues that haven't radically changed in the past 20 years. That should tell you anything.
Wait. Because that's really scary to me, what you just said. Because I'm all about hearing different opinions. That's why I created this. But what's really scary about what you just said is each association, as we know, is related or has a link to a major search company. So and they have the power of whether you're going to get hired for a position or not. So how are we neutral? Like, am I free to say and express my opinions, but then is that going to be held against me because I have a certain opinion on that association?
It's funny you say that because the idea of conflict of interest, they obviously missed that chapter when it came to human resources. They're built on conflict of interests. They literally, so, and again, let me be clear. I've at some point in my career been the darling of these organizations, the go-to guy to come speak at a conference, right? But the problem is that I'm a private citizen. I pay them dues to represent my best interests. So do your job. If I have an opinion or I don't like something, listen. That doesn't happen. And that's first and foremost why people drop off. So
and why people are so afraid to speak up in any way too.
Right. Look what happened to me. I'm doing fine. It's don't be afraid to have an opinion, right? Don't be afraid to post that opinion on social media. Let it be educated. I'm not telling you just to go out there and say, I'm not saying that. But if you're not being heard, yes, of course. And your podcast, again, credit to you because a young and a female voice as well. And I can talk a little bit about, I'm a massive advocate for women coaches. And anyone that knows me knows that is genuinely true. I've spent 2 years on the board of the WTCA, and I have a daughter, I have a wife, I have a sister who I love. She's my hero. I get it, right? And our industry is better for that. But let's just quickly go on that. There's an issue, right? The WTCA literally changed the game in education and pioneering what they have done in getting female coaches heard, right? I was literally in the war room putting on their conferences in New York for 3 straight years, okay? Sarah Stone is like a sister to me. But the problem is they have a falling out with the PTR. What did the PTR do? They create PTRW, right? along with the WTA tour, they start working against each other again. So the problem is that you have something good, embrace it. And there's a little kudos. Look, if you don't know what the WTCA is, please do get out, support it. And if you're a guy in the industry,
Grossman on the show, yeah,
and if you're a guy in the industry, just check yourself. Right, we all have mums, we all have sisters. Don't be an asshole, and embrace this. The beauty of tennis is, did you know that statistically, tennis is the only sport in the world that has gender parity in consumerism and in professionalism with regards to on the Pro Tour. 8 of the 10 top female Forbes earners are in the world, in all sports, are female tennis players.
Yeah.
It is mind-blowing that we have this issue, but that's a whole other topic from another day.
But maybe they see the value in having women coaches, initiative or whatever you call that.
But it's reactive. The problem is this: it's like diversity and inclusion. These are all things that are done because all of a sudden it becomes something that's banging at the door so much that they have to do something. It's not thought out. There's no thought leaders mapping out that this has to be incumbent for the reasons that I just stated. Now, let me answer your question about, I got off topic, about search firms. Having search firms helps professionalize our industry. I do not discount that, right? Yeah. What I do discount is that those search firms should not have close ties with PTR or USPTA. That becomes a conflict of interest, extremely damaging, and it does not separate professionalism from that conflict of interest. That's where an issue lies. Also, the problem with search firms is, and this isn't their fault before everyone starts emailing me, they are a company. No, but they are, look, good for them. They found a way to make money. Good for them. I wish I'd thought of it. I hope you're hearing that. The problem, the bigger infrastructural issue is that in order for them to make money, the clubs have to be able to afford to pay them money. That is therefore migrating any talent that we have to those top 1%, typically country clubs. And it is not going through the proper channels of working in all different aspects of the tennis world. That's damaging. And I absolutely agree with your point about if you, the consumer, are concerned that if you go with one search firm or the other and you say something or you say something about the other, and again, it goes back to my point about announcements, right? One search firm was announced by one organization, and literally 2 days later, another one was the official one of the other one. It's a trend. You can set your watch by it, right? One thing that I'll say about myself is that, and I'm unfortunately, I have close friends that still to this day say to me, "Thank you for saying that. I was afraid to say that." Yeah. And there's a lot of people. And I don't look to be the Robin Hood of the tennis industry. I never asked for that. I didn't want to do this. Okay. But like I said earlier, nothing would make me happier than for the PTR and USPTA to be where my dues were $1,000 a year. I would pay them if that was the case. If their credibility, if their ability to certify, you don't need to go get certified at this current juncture. No one can agree on a pathway. Nothing is unified. Nothing is certified. And the problem is that it gets cheapened. I mean, now you can do online certifications. I mean, what do you sort of feed against the wall in your bedroom and they video? It's a solution, because people will often say to me, "Well, Tim, what's the solution?"
Right.
The solution is very simple. The USPTA and the PTR and the USTA. And unfortunately, I don't think it will ever happen. They need to disband all of it. All of it. You need to have, if you really want to mandate better standard of coaching, you need to have an apprenticeship, a licensing, and it needs to be mandated by the USTA. That simple. Am I the biggest fan of the USTA? No, not in the slightest. But the USTA, they keep going back and forth between, well, we own the US Open, but we're not the governing body. And that's where the problem really lies, because then you have bad governance, right? It's like being in the United States government and saying, well, we're in charge of healthcare, but we're not in charge of crime, right? You can't have that lack, because then what happens is you have these organizations that act with no checks and balances and complete rogue mentality, and nobody is better for it. Now, again, let me be clear. My experience with these organizations has not been bad.
Yeah.
I just currently am not a member, and I'm in a position where I don't see the value to it. Please hear me on that. I got the USPTA Mid-Atlantic Pro of the Year award in 2018. And that was the year in particular that I hit the road, and I really tried to specifically talk on business topics around, and I really did try to grow the industry. And I mean this, that award was extremely meaningful to me. I've won others through the years, but that one was meaningful because I didn't self-nominate or anything like that people do. It felt genuine, right? And that was given by the USPTA. The problem is that I don't see how they can't operate, they can't continue to operate independently. It's just not, it hasn't worked, and it will continue to not work. So do you merge the USPTA and PTR? Well, again, that's a whole nother podcast for another day on the backstory of that. So I don't have a solution. If I could wave my magic wand, the USTA would handle everything, and respect and trust will be put back in the USTA as a result. And you would have, therefore, a legitimate licensing like it's done in Europe for coaches. And there would be credibility surrounding that. It's not something that you pay and get in an afternoon or online or in a weekend. But then also, I would be remiss if I didn't say that one of the issues is that education in the tennis space is not a one-stop shop. It's not the same size for everybody. And that's a problem. If you teach at a country club versus you teach at a high school or college or a racket club, it is a very different experience, and it's a different skill set. And again, if anyone's listening that's young in your career, if you really want to be good at what you do as a coach, you need to immerse yourself in all these different exposures, because that's what's really going to make you, not to sound cliche, but a jack of all trades. And the nice thing with tennis is given me so many opportunities and again, this is advocacy for the industry, not a criticism. And I hope it doesn't come off that way. But the tennis industry, for those of us that are working in it, you can retire early as a tennis pro. People don't think like this, right? If you've been fortunate enough to work in a decent position somewhere at a country club or a director of a racket club or whatever, you can call it a day in your mid-50s and just teach for cash 10 hours a week, and that's your retirement. Do the math. It's not hard to do the math, but people don't think this way. I'll also say this. I'm going to come off as a little ageist here, but it's specifically to the old boys network within the tennis industry. You should not be in a position of power if you are not actively working in the industry, or you are basically of a generation that has passed, because you're completely unrelatable. Those that are successful in our world in general, right? They work hard, they get into a position where they have some flexibility with their time for family, loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. They still do what they do. But the problem is that people who are running our industry, who are older and not in touch, these people should be sitting on foundation boards, raising money, not trying to run the commerce side of the industry. That is extremely damaging. Look at Bill Gates. And I know Mr. Gates because I actually have been his tennis coach on and off for the past 6 years. Fun fact for everyone there. Bill Gates does not run Microsoft, right? The guy's 65 years of age. Do you know why he doesn't run Microsoft? Because he knows that he's not in touch with what is necessary to make it the behemoth that it is. Everyone still, when you associate Microsoft, you go Bill Gates, right? But a true leader makes their mark, makes their impact, and then is still associated with it, but doesn't need to be the face of the franchise anymore. That's what we lack. That we have so many people hanging on for purely egotistical reasons, and it's extremely damaging. I welcome more diversity. I welcome more female leadership. You know, the USPTA just hired a new CEO, and like I said, I want to be very clear. I will re-sign my dues, and I am extremely optimistic, and whatever weight I have is 100% behind that CEO right now. and optimistic for the best.
You might get some emails after this.
A good friend of mine is Laura Bowen. You know Laura?
Of course, she's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So Laura is a legend. I mean, again, I would have just given her a nudge and said, "Hey, do you want to come over and be the new CEO of USPTA?" If I was leading the search, but she probably isn't crazy enough to take on that job.
She's amazing. I did a podcast with her too, where she actually interviewed me, but she's great. Well, Tim, I don't want to take any more of your time. We've been online for quite some time, and I know you're at IMG and all that. So we'll end it there. But again, thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts with us, and all the best with Blue Chip and all the things that you're doing.
Thank you. Jen, let me say thank you. Let me say these last two things real quick.
Yeah.
2 things to leave people with. Remember that there's three things I wanted. 3 things, in fact, I just want to leave everyone with. Firstly, be guarded by reflection. I wish I knew this when I was in my 20s, right? Pay close attention to what you say, what you put out there, how you operate, and be your own critic, okay? That's going to serve you well. I learned this lesson in my mid-30s. I wish I'd learned it in my mid-20s, right? The second thing is be an advocate for our industry, but don't be afraid to have educated opinions that drive change. And lastly, I have a saying with this: together we move the needle. Together, right? Extremely important. So don't think that my criticisms are to be divisive. They're not. There is no anyone that truly knows me knows that my heart is in the betterment of our industry. And lastly, if you are in a position of leadership, do not always take the invite. Okay? If somebody calls me up and says, "Tim, do you want to come speak at this conference?" Don't do it just because they called you up. Unless you have something new, original, insightful to say, don't do it, because it has a knock-on effect where we get very lazy in curating original and thought-provoking content. So I'm a great example of this. 2019, speaking everywhere. I was like, I got embarrassed by it. I was like, I couldn't come up with anything new to say. So I've taken 3 years off. Peace. Maybe you might see me up and around at a conference in the near future. So there we go. Yeah. But I think that's good. There's only so many times you can go to a conference and hear the same person. A lot of us tennis pros, we think we're like Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones, that people will travel to a conference, pay a hotel fee, an entry fee, and all this just to see us on stage. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I could go on and on about that, but we'll leave it at that for today.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tim.